Lots to cover. First, some news. Abortion and same-sex marriage will soon be legal in Northern Ireland. British Parliament took advantage of the North's divided government by passing an act in July which abolished Northern Ireland's 158-year-old abortion ban and relaxed restrictions on same-sex marriage in Ireland. Since no functioning government was formed by October 21st, Northern Ireland will now be in line with the rest of the UK. We are in the midst of the third and final week of the Amazon Synod in Rome. The controversial proposals to ordain married men and female deacons remain. Meanwhile, new revelations about the Holy See's financial situation emerged, and a furious debate has erupted over those indigenous idols that took a dive into the Tiber River this week. Joining me now from Rome with analysis is Papal Posse member and editor-in-chief of thecatholicthing.org, Robert Royal. Robert, thanks for being with us and staying up. Now, I have to start with Pachamama, or whatever the omnipresent indigenous idol is that has in some ways become the symbol of this entire synod. The Vatican has been needlessly evasive about its origins and what it represents. Now, some say it's a symbol of life, some say motherhood. Whatever it is not a Christian statue, as you can see. Well, on Monday, video emerged of two men entering the church of Santa Maria in Traspontina, near the Vatican. They remove the statues and then proceed to toss them into the Tiber. Now, what has been the reaction to this in Rome, Robert, to this story?
Well, if you mean inside the Vatican, they continue to try to just stonewall about it, say, oh, it wasn't all that important. It means one thing to another person, to one person, one thing to another person. Mm-hmm. And this is precisely the problem, of course. And the way I would like to put it is they didn't vet this. They really didn't. There's a problem here. Either these things are trivial, in which case I don't know why they're important for the sake of the synod, mm-hmm. or they are, in fact, important spiritual entities of some kind, some undetermined kind, that no one took the trouble to look into to see if it might create a problem. And so just logically, either all the talk about honoring these native traditions is just talk because it's not all that serious, or these are serious things and no one took the trouble to see whether they should be entering into the sacred precincts of the Vatican or that church in Traspontina. It's really a wreck, and also the PR part of it has been badly bungled.
Yeah, I want to get into some of that. And I've been hearing in some of the Twitter traffic and social media traffic, you're insulting indigenous people by throwing these things away. Well, Robert, the apostles insulted the indigenous people of Greece and Rome when they overthrew temples and got rid of their idols as well. So that argument doesn't quite wash with me. Anyway, the head of Vatican Communications, Paolo Ruffini, called this a stunt, the throwing away of these idols. He says discarding the statues, quote, is a gesture that seems to me to contradict the spirit of dialogue that should always animate everyone. And Andrea Tornielli, who's the editorial director at the Vatican Communication Apparatus, he wrote, an image of motherhood and the sacredness of life, a traditional symbol for indigenous people, represent the bond with our Mother Earth, as described by St. Francis of Assisi in his Canticle of the Creatures, was thrown away with contempt in the name of tradition and doctrine. Now, Robert, she was on an altar of a Catholic church next to an image of the Virgin of Guadalupe. I mean, there's a photo here. Your thoughts on the Vatican's efforts to defend this image that they have yet to fully explain the origin or significance of?
Right. Well, look, I think that this puts this controversy into some secular debate about dissing people of a certain ethnic background or certain racial background. This has nothing to do with that. They don't seem to be able to perceive that some people see this as a theological question, that we want to know what is our church actually bringing in from the Amazon here to Rome. Yeah. Now, look, on the face of it, what the purpose of the Vatican is to bring Jesus to the Amazon, not to bring Amazon gods or goddesses or spiritualities to Rome. I mean, obviously there has to be an enculturation. Missionaries have always understood this. You have to be able to understand the cultures you're dealing with, try to find some entry point for Catholic concepts. But there's just a kind of a brushing off of the potential theological damage that this might be doing, as if it's solely a matter of sort of like in American ethnic politics or identity politics, everybody has a right to be present. That's not what's happening here. Certain people see it in theological terms. If it's not theological, then explain that to us. But you just can't keep brushing this off as if it's something that it's not.
Yeah, I kind of see this symbolic of the entire synod. You know, you had this very odd icon, which apparently was created by an artist down in the Amazonian region and then replicated and brought to Rome. So it was an odd thing that on its face was meant to convey something to other folks and with no real regard for Catholic tradition. So it was an importation of something. And then you have a group of lay people. Now, look, I'm not saying everybody should go overturn what they perceive as idols or you know, engage in you know, kidnapping things and destroying them. However, it is an example of the laity taking matters into their own hands because no one in the upper echelons will respond to their needs, their wants, the actual people in the pews. That's what I somehow see symbolically conveyed by this whole fracas. So we'll see how it shapes out. Apparently the Vatican is pursuing charges against these two men and want to charge them with criminal acts. Now, turning to a more serious subject of the Synod, the ordination of elderly married men to the priesthood and a female diaconate are both in the draft version of the final document of this Synod. Was this a predetermined outcome, Robert?
Yeah, I don't know if we know that for absolute certain yet. The final document has not come out, and in fact, as always happens at these synods, the last few days, as you know quite well, Raymond, there's a lot of running around and trying to get suggestions in and rewriting, and they already warned us that the final version will not be out until late on Saturday, which is really the final working day of the Synod. But look, I spoke with someone very sympathetic to the Pope today, and he said, well, you know, previous bishops have asked John Paul II and Benedict for a married priesthood to help deal with their priest shortage. So this is just a continuation of that. The difference, though, I think here is that this is the bishops of a whole region, which really, of course, is going to have a much greater heft in terms of the impact it might have not only in the Amazon region, but other parts of the world. So I think we're going to see that suggestion being made by a majority. On the question of women deacons, there seems to be some weaseling around, or if you want to put it in more neutral terms, some sort of massaging of the language. They're talking now about a service of diaconia, which wouldn't be quite the same as the formalness of a deaconess. Well, diaconia means service. Diaconia is the Greek word from which we get the word deacon. And so it's a service of service that they're now proposing with this kind of compromise language, I suppose. I think both of those things will be in there. We anticipated that from the very beginning. So sort in many ways, there actually is a lack of curiosity.
This could end up being sort of a altar girls of deacons. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, I think something like that. I mean, in a lot of ways, there doesn't even seem to be a lot of interest in what's being produced in the document. In the past, people would look at who's voting for what do the small circles, what are the small circles suggesting. Someone finally asked at a press briefing today, well, how are the bishops going to vote about this? Are they just going to vote about the general document? Are they going to vote about individual paragraphs? Well, it looks like they're going to do, as in the past, individual paragraphs, and they have to pass by 2/3. But actually, there doesn't seem to be a lot of drama expected. I think everyone kind of knows that it's a foregone conclusion, and we pretty much know what the shape of this is going to be.
Well, there's no drama because all of the participants have been hand-selected who already had a certain cast of mind and a vision. So it isn't as if this is a constitutional convention where you have fractious, regions coming together to hammer it out. No, these people are all in agreement. Those who are in disagreement are not invited, like my guest forthcoming here on the show. I mean, those people just aren't invited to the party. So one of the main architects, Bob, of this synod, Erwin Krautler, who we've heard a lot about, he's the Bishop Emeritus in Brazil, he revealed in a new book, Renewal Now, Impulses from the Amazon for the Reform of the Church, that in his diocese, women are not only presiding over liturgies of the Word, they're giving homilies, a practice contrary to Catholic liturgical rules. When claiming that women have too little to say in the Catholic Church, he says, often I refer to the fact that at our end, at the Xingu, things go very differently with where women lead the liturgies of the Word, and that they, in doing so, also give a homily. But this experience in Brazil, and perhaps also somewhere else, at the most, a tender flash of light, but it is far from being a proof for the sunrise that we've been awaiting for so long. Does this reflect the general view among Synod participants? This is pretty radical stuff.
Yes, it's quite radical, and like many other things that kind of surround this Synod, and again, not leaving out those figurines, which have theological import. It's hard to say, because the news flow, I think, is there's just a trickle. It's the least I've ever seen in any Synod. We don't even know, even some of these participants like Bishop Krautler say they don't know who's written the final document. Mm-hmm. We get bits and pieces of hints here and there that, somehow the draft has been produced, and yeah, there is some work being done with other suggestions, but it's quite mysterious. So, in a way, what they did in the Amazon on their own by allowing women to do these things that you rightly point out are not in harmony with what the Church teaches. There are larger theological implications that we'll have to wait for the final document to see if they're included.
In his book, Krautler also recalls a very important April 4th, 2014 meeting with Pope Francis. And when Krautler, raised the lack of priests in the Amazon, which itself may be a bit of a red herring, Bob. We'll get to that in a moment. But he claims the Pope brought up the ideas of a Bishop Fritz Lobinger. Now, in his 1998 book, like his brothers and sisters ordaining community leaders, Lobinger envisions a team of elders who lead a parish and are ordained and thus able to celebrate Mass. And these elders could be married, male or female, according to Lobinger's idea. How significant is it that Pope Francis brought this idea to the fore?
Well, look, there's also been a great effort at the press briefings to kind of rein in any speculation about what the Holy Father has been saying in the Synod Hall. So we have very little idea of what he's been thinking. But one of the things that they've been talking about over and over again, I've never seen this at a previous Synod, is they kind of casually just say, well, look, the purpose of a Synod is not to produce a document. The purpose of a Synod is to walk together and talk together, have a chance to exchange views, etc. But ultimately, the Holy Father is going to do whatever he wants, and that's in accord with various documents about how synods are organized. I mean, I think these things are quite radical. I think that the implications are going to have to be thought through very carefully. I just learned today from a very reliable source that Cardinal Stella, who in the past had been thought to be one of the leaders of the movement to ordain married men, came out very, very strongly in the Synod Hall in favor of celibacy, which I'm told surprised the Pope, as he was surprised when Cardinal Turkson from Africa a few weeks ago also came out and made that statement. So insofar as we can see what shadows are moving in the background, there seems to be more resistance than you would have thought at the beginning, but we can't know until we see finally
the Pope
what the
is going to make
document
the
is,
decision.
if some of that appears.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then ultimately, months down the line, he will issue some marching orders.
Now, Bob, very quickly, because I've got lots to cover and we're running out of time. This story that we've been fed from the beginning of this synod, really from years gone by, that there's a depletion or a lack of priests in the Amazonian region. It turns out 80% of the population, according to multiple reports I've read, 80% of the population in the Amazon live in populated or metropolitan areas. They suffer from the same lack of priests that we do in other regions of the world. Why is this so special? Why is this region, why is it such a crisis that we have to change church teaching on ordination to accommodate it?
Well, for me, there's a basic incoherence here. A lot of the talk has been about, environmental questions, people living certain cultures and spiritualities in the jungles and whatnot. And of course, that presents a certain set of problems that doesn't exist everywhere in the world. But you're right, to focus on those particular problems of what is a relative minority of that particular region itself, and not to look to other solutions. One of the things someone mentioned the other day, which was quite striking, is that there are 1,200 priests from Colombia who are actually assigned elsewhere. They're in the United States or they're here in the Vatican itself, and that the distribution of priests from those Latin American countries themselves has to be restudied. So there are lots of other bits and pieces of this story. And look, as we've talked about very often on this show, we know that the numbers of Catholics in the Amazon region is declining rapidly because of the evangelizing by the Pentecostals. So yes, there may be fewer priests than are needed, but there also seem to be fewer Catholics, and that in itself is a problem. So something much more energetic and much better focused has to come forward. I don't know whether viri probati is the right solution, but it seems to be something that has persisted since long before we got here a few weeks ago, that certain people at least have fixed on whatever the reality on the ground.
Yeah. Bob, I've got to go. I was going to talk about this pact, catacomb pact. We'll get to that next week with you and Father Murray. I want to talk about the revelations about the Vatican Bank, Vatican finances we're learning this week, and they are spilling out fast and furiously. New documents, financial documents released, revealed a large deficit at the Vatican and a mismanagement of church funds. The confidential report shows that the Secretary of State used about $725 million on what is described as reckless speculative investments, according to L'Espresso. Now, most of the money came from Peter's Pence, the Pope's charity fund. The Vatican can't be happy with this news breaking during the Synod, is it, Bob?
Well, they haven't spoken very much about this. I did an article the other day in which I pointed out that Cardinal Maradiaga, who's one of the Pope's special advisors, and he's very close with the Pope, denied in an interview with La Repubblica, that newspaper of Eugenio Scalfari that we talk a lot about, and that seems to create a lot of problems for the Pope.
Right.
Maradiaga was already denying that the Vatican was going to go bankrupt. And of course, when somebody has to come out and actually deny something like that, it makes you think again about what the possibilities are. But the information that's come out most recently, and I think we're going to hear a lot more about this in the coming weeks and months, is that there are declining revenues. Peter's Pence, it looks like from this, there's a new book by this Italian journalist, Alessandro Nuzzi.
Right.
He claims that Peter's Pence has gone from about 100 million euros down to about 70 and maybe even as low as 60. So that's almost down to half of what it was almost a few years ago. About these investments, I think that the Vatican, that the story there is that not so much that they made investments, because it's a good thing to invest money in productive enterprises or profitable enterprises, but they bungled the way that they did this. The good economic analysts just say that the way they did this was just reflective of incompetence, and perhaps there's also some corruption in there, but the major story seems to be they just didn't know what they were doing.
Yeah. Bob, we're going to leave it there. We're out of time, but we are certainly far away from the days of Cardinal Sciocca or Cardinal Pell, who had, tried to put the Vatican in the black. Anyway, we will follow up on all of this next week. Thank you, Bob. Follow Robert Royal's reports from the Amazon Synod in Rome at thecatholicthing.org. And be sure to join us next week. The full papal posse will reconvene and recap the Amazon Synod and much more.